of launching our new platform, voicetechglobal.com, and planning some education and training curriculum. And it was interesting. We were actually Voice Tech TO prior. It was a Toronto-based community. There was a chapter in London, and we were potentially scaling out that way, but still doing in-person events. What ended up happening was it just was a happenstance that hello?
Yeah, could you please go on mute, please, everyone? Yeah. Sorry about that, Tim.
No problem. Yeah, so we were just about to launch our web platform, and it's like our last in-person team meeting together. We realized that it was coincidental that we were moving fully online, and we had bought the domain Voice Tech Global. We kind of liked our old name, but Voice Tech Global, to be honest, was a affordable voice tech domain. And we said, okay, let's just embrace it. And it was interesting because the last year was tremendous growth for Voice Tech Global as well. I ended up stepping away from my job at a product consultancy in Toronto to focus entirely on Voice Tech Global. And we really, we had been doing these workshops and kind of enterprise team training, and went and focused entirely on online curriculum, which was different. We approach it differently than kind of cohort-based education or some of the learn at your own pace. We do small in-person remote Zoom classes with a lot of hands-on activities in both of our courses. And we just found that people were coming from all over the world. So the global aspect of like the remote Zoom world was huge for us. As well, at the same time, we saw a lot of interest, growing interest in kind of B2B training, as well as teams across different sectors saw huge demand and influx in volume at their call centers, and were looking for conversational AI solutions for chatbots or voice bots. So we saw it kind of happening from both sides. One was it became a more global world for us. We had students coming from all over, and so we had to also start building in thinking about language into our curriculum. And then the other part was just the interest and growth in the industry itself and how COVID has accelerated that.
Yeah, that sounds like a really great timing for you and your company.
Convenient, yeah. Yeah.
And so just being in the conversational AI field really just opened up many other communication and connection channels. And in some ways, pandemic almost expedited those connections because the need for that was really high during that time.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us. So next we are going to go to Sarah, who is representing United States for today's discussion. So Sarah, would you tell us about yourself and what was your experience during the pandemic?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. And as we were talking about beforehand, I love that this panel, we're all representing like a different part of the world. So it's going to be really interesting to hear everyone's perspectives on how the pandemic affected what they're doing. So yeah, I'm based here in Washington, DC. I'm the Chief Content Officer of Matchbox.io. We create voice experiences mainly for smart speakers, but we've also branched out to a mobile app and to a podcast and to a website. We have in our portfolio 20 voice experiences on Amazon Alexa, Google Assistant, and Samsung Bixby. We've got 11 million users around the world in dozens of countries in 4 different languages. We have hundreds of thousands of daily active users. And our most popular voice experiences that you might have heard of are Question of the Day and Riddle of the Day, also Kids Quiz. So before the pandemic hit in early 2020 at Matchbox, we had found lots of success since the founding of Matchbox in 2017. And we, you know, are not, our personalities at Matchbox aren't such that you just sit on your laurels and just kind of wait for the next thing. We're always trying to look for what else we can be doing. So in 2020, before the pandemic hit, before we knew it was coming, we had already planned for 2020 to be a year of experimentation. And we had planned on, experimenting with a new podcast, a daily podcast, with a new mobile app, with a new website, all of which would provide fresh, bite-sized content every single day, brand new content every single day. And that's what we wound up doing. And the pandemic allowed us to really focus in on that and further expand Matchbox, further expand our hiring and localizing of that content around the world.
Yeah, that's really amazing to hear. Sounds like you were also fortunate to just experiment with that and learn a lot about the voice technology during that time, especially with podcasts. That has been like a booming industry during this time to teach everyone about what is happening. For, otherwise we would have been having in-person meetings. Once they are gone, all of a sudden, I'm so happy that we were able to find other communication methods to still continue learning. So that's so great to hear. All right, with that said, we are gonna pass to Joao. Joao is representing us from Brazil. Would you tell us about yourself and your experience during the pandemic in the voice technology? Do we have Joao here? I think you might be on mute.
Sorry.
No worries. Thank you.
You did great on the pronunciation of my name. Congratulations on that. I'm João Paulo, and I live actually in São Paulo in Brazil. I am a father of 3 boys. I stay at home dad. And during the pandemic, I also founded my company, which is IARA Digital. I came from a management background. My last experience before starting with voice was as a dean of a university, and now I'm working 2 shifts in voice. I have my own company, and I also work for another agency doing voice experiences. And I'm also a podcast host here in Brazil. So IARA Digital is a voice first agency, and we do voice experiences for clients ranging all sizes. And since the beginning, we quickly became a relevant player here in Brazil because we focused on building a lot of experiences for clients, and we amassed a number of experiences that not other agency here have. We did skills for Fiat Chrysler, for Domino's Pizza, for Disney, and we also have proprietary skills like a choose your own adventure skill, which we just relaunched this week. We going to start to launch stories every Friday now on this choose your own adventure skill. And we also have voice products. One of them is focused on advertising. It's an advertising platform for skill owners. So we enable skill owners to land some space on their skills to be used as a programmatic audio ads platform. And we also have another product, which is like a widget that the skill creator install on their voice app, and it can be used as a notifications platform to have a marketing campaign using the notifications API of Alexa. So we were born in the pandemic, so we have not yet seen what is like outside of the pandemic. And what is also interesting is that the market in Brazil was actually born 6 months prior to the pandemic, with the arrival of Alexa here, which was in October of 2019. So what we experience is a high growth of adoption. So people engaging with the skills, but we weren't able to see what was before because we didn't really have a market. Another thing that is interesting here in Brazil is that most people use their mobile phones with Google Assistant to access the voice experience. Here is a little different from US. In the US, it's like 60% is iOS and 40% is Android. And here is 90% Android. So,
Wow.
and 85% of Google Assistant. So the majority of the people that are using voice assistants are based on, you know, the kind of usage that Google offers, which is very transactional and not as focused on the experience or the living room mindset, if you will.
Yeah.
So what we have focused since the beginning is that on that experiences that are more, you know, like an entertainment experiences, and we're gonna focus that. But we also know that there's a huge market for Google Actions here, but we are focused on Alexa right now.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. And you also were able to, you know, benefit from the opportunities with podcasting and at the same time reach out to this global community. And so with that said, I am really curious to know more about like your clients, like the skills and actions you started building. Were they for local clients or around the world globally? And also, I'm curious about the Brazilian users as well. Like, are they using the Google Assistant in English language or in Brazilian locally? Like, how do you think Google Assistant made the transition to open up to other localities outside of the United States or outside of English-speaking countries?
Yeah, so here, Google Assistant, both Google Assistant and Alexa are available in Portuguese. Actually, only 5% of Brazilians can speak English. So it's really based on Portuguese and all the experiences. And the cases that we have done here are with local influencers. The influencer marketing here is really hot, and for Domino's Pizza, for instance, the marketing campaign was to, you know, take the pizza order from an influencer, and it was a huge success because we model the experience as the user were to ask for the pizza to the influencer. It was a huge success with a lot of engagement. And so both Google and Alexa are available in Portuguese. And what we have noticed is that whenever the users are accessing via Google Assistant, the engagement is always lower than with Alexa. So when the user accesses with Alexa, they are more engaged in longer conversations.
Right.
So we have noticed that difference, that the sessions, the conversations that the user have with Alexa are more meaningful, and they have more, you know, the highest rate of engagement and conversion in the end of the conversation.
Wow, that's so interesting to also see Alexa expanded outside of English-speaking countries. And like you said, Google experiences tend to be more transactional because it's in a mobile phone, and a lot of users like to do like self-service tasks that are more mobile oriented. But in Alexa, there are really good voice experiences outside of those transactional tasks. So yeah, great commentary on that. So with that said, I will pass this over to Jen, who is representing us from England. Would you tell us about yourself and what was your experience during the pandemic in voice technology, both like personally and in your company, in your circles?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Nice to be chatting to the US chapter. I usually co-head up the UK chapter. That's been a bit quiet since we've been on complete event lockdown. Yeah. Anyway, hi everyone. So the personal and the professional are completely intertwined in me because I'm the co-founder and CCO of Vixen Labs. So that is my personal life. No, not quite that bad, but at least in the world of voice, it certainly is. So if If you know anything about Vixen Labs, we are Europe's largest voice consultancy. We work with sort of big FTSE 100 blue chip brands over here in the UK, also a little bit in the US as well. So we have quite a global footprint. We've been going sort of 2.5 years-ish now, only somehow. And yeah, that's it really. So in terms of what has happened over the pandemic, I think what's interesting is looking at the lifespan of the company, of probably a lot of companies here. It's not necessarily super easy to say what would have happened with a pandemic or without a pandemic, because our companies have not all been going 15 years. We can't say, oh, back in 98, that's what it was like. You know, we don't know. So for us, in our major year, like the first major year of trading, you know, when you're over the kind of speed bumps of startup land and you're actually in like a fully fledged business, because that's the reality of it, we were also in a pandemic. What could it have been like? And me and my co-founder talk about it all the time. What would it have been like without the pandemic? Don't know. I can tell you what did happen though. So if people say, how did the pandemic affect your business? I was like, you tell me. But it really hit in sort of 3 areas, or there's 3 really clear areas. First of all is the team. So first of all, obviously our entire team had to go remote very, very quickly. We went remote pre it was being enforced. A bit of a story, me and my co-founder were actually in the US the week before Trump shut the airports, if you remember that. And it was that week where we were sort of on New York, we were looking down on, I can't remember which main avenue it was, and just every day there were less people. And we were like, this is going to go horribly wrong. And we actually called in, shut the office from the US. We were over in business, shut it down. Everyone went home, packed up, ended the contract. That was it. We haven't had an office since. And actually the team reacted really, really well to that. Surprisingly, we were mixed in a hybrid office at the start anyway. But that's been a huge cultural shift. And it's been a massive cultural shift because our team has tripled in 18 months. We're currently about 18. We are soon, in the next couple of months, going to be over the 20-person mark, which is quite a mark for a business as well. And actually, there's been a big part of actually ensuring culture and consistency and ways of working during a pandemic. So actually, as a business and as people who work in that business and people who work in innovation, where you're used to trying to be able to get together and do an in-person scrum or a war room or insert relevant buzzwords from the world of UX, you know, that's actually been really challenging to do that, and also to do that in a way that isn't deeply fatiguing. So that's team. So there's a really important human side of it, which we don't always talk about enough in business. You do, but in wellness sessions.
Yes.
Not when you're talking about business. The two seem to sit separately. Then there's been the growth of the business and the world of voice in the UK. So like I said, you know, our team has tripled. Obviously, that's been indicative of the amount of work that we've had. Owing to statistics that have very recently come out, the UK has overtaken the US in terms of the highest growth market for voice. Maybe that's because the US has slightly stagnated because of such early initial growth, or it's going to overtake because the usage is slightly different in the UK and the US, we'll see. But the UK is still very, very aggressively growing, and we're now at actually 1 in 4 people in the UK now have a voice assistant in one way or another, or 1 in 4 households, I can't remember, but it's relatively equitable to the same data. But also our clients and what they have gone through. And so that's my third point. So the site, you know, everything has grown, right? And the UK has absolutely blossomed in terms of voice over the past 18 months, but also in terms of what our clients have gone through. So to give a couple of actual tangible examples, we work with who used to be called Reckitt Benckiser, who are now called Reckitt, who, if you don't know, are a bit like a Procter & Gamble or a Unilever. They're huge, but not very well known for their name. But you will know one of their products, Lysol. And we worked with Lysol pre-pandemic, right? We launched a skill in the January of the pandemic. We actually did 2 launches. So first of all, we had to grow with that business, and it was all about germ kill as well. And suddenly, and you remember the whole Lysol hoopla that happens as well, and you talk about it, and we had to ride that whole journey with them. We had to amend content on the fly, whilst also trying to understand regulatory updates as well, in the Wild West, which is voice, because to be honest, you never quite know where one regulation ends and another one begins, and you're building best practice as you do it within a heightened environment of public health, right? And now we're reviewing functionality of a skill where a business has fundamentally changed over 18 months because of actually the impact on it and the uses of the product of a household brand that normally does not move, you know, that, and yet these are products that are, you know, one and the same of our businesses all the time, and yet they're actually really going through a ground shift. So huge change. Or for example, we work with Sony Music. The way in which we use and digest music has radically changed. And, you know, we talk about podcasts, right? They've been supercharged by the pandemic, but also accessing music through smart speakers. So actually the work that we do is all about metadata and voice search and accessing content in a way that is how actually the labels want to be able to try and control that journey through a quite monopolized experience through someone like Amazon wants it to happen through Amazon Music. So actually working through that strategically in a much more of a metadata standpoint. Or food delivery, right? We work with McDonald's UK.
Wow.
They shut, we started the project and then every restaurant was shut. So things like that. So actually it's been a huge roller coaster, and you know, you already have to be extremely agile in voice as a business working with big brands. You're often working within an innovation pot, but at board level because of the type of change you're trying to do within the business. So, and then also having to be very, very reactive with the companies. And where it's been really successful as well, because we're small enough to be quick and nimble and agile compared to maybe incumbent digital agencies, we've been able to sometimes support and go, hey, it's okay. You know, we can actually push that update through voice quicker than you having to go through legal to get an update made through your like digital web copy or something, which is going to take 6 weeks for an update to be made because they're still in 98. So yeah, that's a little bit of a really broad overview where it's affected the people, it's affected us, the scale and pace, and I don't know what that would have been like if it was pandemic or not, and how much has affected the type of businesses that we work with.
Yeah, well, that's a really great overview, and just another indication that your company was able to quickly pivot to you know, grab these emerging technologies and make adjustments and just grow out of that. It's like, for example, the Lysol just became like super, you know, controversial here, and there were a lot of misinformation around it. And I think creating some kind of a voice skill to educate users around that became so important. And in other ways, like you mentioned with food ordering, even in the United States, a lot of restaurants closed the doors. But interestingly, I don't know if these type of restaurants exist in England, but in the United States, drive-through restaurants were still open because you can communicate without going into a store, without touching anything, and just still being able to get your food that way. But more interestingly, I think McDonald's is also experimenting with really innovative technologies and now building, you know, touch-free and human-free kiosks for ordering food through drive-throughs. So that's another really innovative.
It also radically changes the use cases and the user scenarios, right? Yeah. So in terms of actually what are the primary needs set of the audience that we're designing for completely changed. So in the UK, drive-throughs are not that, there are some, but they're not that prolific. It's not like in the US at all. They weren't that big a deal. It wasn't that important. It was like usually on motorways. To suddenly during the pandemic, at least if you lived in London, if there was a drive-through, there would be a queue around the block.
Yeah.
was a very weird site. As it caused problems on the road, there was congestions in some area of London because it was backing up the road because of people trying to go through a drive-through that normally caters for like 5 cars at a time. And suddenly we had to completely change like why a restaurant finder that was geolocalized existed when, you know, before it would be walk-in, or knowing if something was 24 hours a day because you've got 3 a.m. lunches. Hey, McDonald's use case, or, you know, but now it's suddenly like, actually, where is my nearest drive-through, especially if I live in the city, because actually it could be super far away. So yeah, and it constantly changed as well. There's not a pandemic version of life and a non-pandemic version of life. There is a constant moving target, especially in this country with the way that our regulations were constantly changing in terms of lockdown or not. I won't get into politics, but yeah, it was.
Yeah, that's a great explanation for that. And like you just touched on the next topic that I wanted to get to, like a lot of people were just getting started with voice technology or even customer services before the pandemic, and it started booming. But I wonder how the technology and the trends will be moving forward, just, you know, beyond this point. So I would like to extend that question to Tim. Tim, would you tell us about where do you see the market and trends going with voice technology or customer excellence and services after the pandemic? Because right now, especially in the United States or North America, the restrictions are loosening up more and more every day, and we are going to start going back into our offices. So I am curious to know how the voice technology will change, or even how the way we are working and communicating will change after that point.
Yeah, and just to bridge off of what Jen was mentioning about changing, sorry, my Slack people are messaging me, how kind of the customer needs were changing. So there were a lot of things that changed dramatically. People staying at home, retail close, people dealing with isolation, screen fatigue because they were on their computers all the time. So we saw the rise of social media, social audio like Clubhouse really take off, but also Zoom, everybody on Zoom all the time. And I think some of these changes are becoming embedded in our behavior, and others are you know, we're going to get back outside and have different experiences of hitting up the patio or something like that. So I think we'll have to see what goes back, but regardless, it's not going back to normal, it's going back to the new normal. And businesses at the same time, you know, saw huge gains in efficiencies when their call centers kind of both offshore and onshore call centers were slammed with 200 to 400% increases in call volume. A personal anecdote, my mom at the beginning, just as the airports were shutting down, came back from the US to Toronto. We were all at my sister's wedding in California where she lives. And my mom and her husband had gone to Arizona and they got sick. They came back, just came back a couple days after they got back. They started feeling something. They both got a bad flu or cold, and she needed to call telehealth. She waited for over 5 hours on a telehealth line for a nurse to do an assessment. And she hung up and she got a call back 2 days later, but it's purely because of this swell of worried and anxious people. And I ended up consulting with Service Ontario and working on some research to help improve telehealth and the triage process for COVID risk assessments. But that's just one place, isn't telehealth. We also have industries like education, mental health, financial services, anywhere where there's a high demand for one-on-one services, where the demand far outstripped resource. People were looking for ways to institute chatbots and virtual agents, so not just even voice, but conversational AI as a whole through different channels, including kind of telephony or call center embedded solutions from Dialogflow's new call center solution, contact center solution. I don't think that we're going to go back to kind of a pre-COVID era. I think that businesses have learned the efficiencies gained there, and they're doing some service design right now where they can actually provide more human service by triaging or funneling through these services at the front end. So I think it's not necessarily taking away humans. You know, an educator who has maybe like Google Read Along or some new conversational tool to teach students and give them more one-on-one attention might be able to focus on the students who need more human one-on-one interventions because they're struggling. So that's just one example, but we need to rethink kind of the role of the human and the role of the bot now, because we're working together and we can find efficiencies, and it's not saying we don't need human contact. We still need lots of human contact, but we can find ways to optimize that.
Yeah, definitely. I really like what you said about we are not going back to the old normal. We are adjusting and making this transition to the new normal in all areas of our field, from healthcare to finance to entertainment, everything we can think of. Yeah, that was a great explanation. So Sarah, I would like to extend the same question to you. Where do you see the market and trends moving towards as we transition out of this pandemic and get into post-pandemic life?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, if we look at, so our portfolio mostly is on smart speakers. So if you look at smart speaker usage across our own portfolio at Matchbox, looking pre-pandemic, during pandemic, and as we're starting to slowly emerge from the pandemic, it's been fascinating to me to see what the numbers have done, what the usage patterns have been. So pre-pandemic, people would use their smart speakers, use our voice experiences on the smart speaker. During the week, there would be spikes around 7 a.m., around 7 p.m., because that's when people were at home, right? You have breakfast together as a family, parents go off to work, kids go off to school. So during the day, there's not a whole lot of usage. Everyone's back home in the evening. That's when the usage starts back up, right? So we would see these spikes Monday through Friday. On the weekends, there was more usage overall. This is pre-pandemic, more usage overall, but the usage was spread out throughout the day, because people were at home Saturdays and Sundays. Typically, you're at home more often on Saturdays and Sundays. So there's more usage overall, but it's spread out throughout the day. When the pandemic hit, pretty much right away, we saw that weekend usage then spread throughout the week. You didn't see these spikes at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Monday through Friday. It was the previous weekend usage was now throughout the week, so a slight uptick overall. And usage, you know, 7 days a week, but then that it was spread out throughout the day, which makes sense when you think about it, but no one knew what was going to happen. No one knew what was going to happen with those usage patterns. So now that we are, depending on where you are in the world, that we're slowly starting to emerge from the pandemic, we are seeing those usage patterns change back slowly. So we're seeing those spikes Monday through Friday. Usage overall is still higher than it was pre-pandemic. I think what's happening on smart speakers is really pointing the way towards where voice is going, because smart speakers make voice technology and voice interactions kind of fun for the average user that maybe had never used Siri before, or who had never really interacted with or felt uncomfortable in other environments. And the smart speaker made the average user more comfortable in using voice, and a little novel in the beginning. It's kind of fun to interact with this, you know, to interact with Alexa or with Google Assistant. So I think voice is here to stay. More people in the pandemic became much more comfortable in using voice, either on the smart speaker or on their phone or wherever else. And this is still just the beginning. And I feel like we've all been saying this for years now. We're just in the beginning, but we really are just in the beginning. And you know, where all this is going is just having voice assistants being ambient, always there, always listening, always helpful, context aware. And I'm very happy to share later on, we can talk about, I have an idea where all this is going in 50 years and what it'll look like, but we're still just at the very beginning. We're learning and users are learning too.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point. We are definitely learning from the user research we are doing as the users are learning. So it will be really interesting to see if those users who have gotten more used to using smart speakers and built this confidence, if they are going to make the transition to use those assistants using their mobile phones as we transition out of this.
Exactly. And I think that's coming. I think people are just going to be used to interacting with voice wherever they go. So that's coming. It's not there just yet, but it's coming.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see the regular household appliances and household members to be really more comfortable in adopting this new technology. So that's really great. So with that said, I would like to pass this question to Joao.
Yes, so first of all, we are unfortunately quite not there yet with the vaccines and COVID, but I think we'll get there in 6 to 8 months. So I will talk future for us is like, you know, March next year, the second trimester of next year. And what I think it's going is that we are seeing a huge adoption, and we are just out of Prime Day here, and you know, Alexa prices dropped 50% here. So there was a huge, you know, amount of people talking about buying Alexa, and we are thinking that this is going to cause us a great wave of projects in the next future. But what I see is that a clear transition from the types of inquiries, business inquiries we've been getting. We used to get a lot of inquiries from agencies that, of course, didn't have any knowledge on how to manage a voice project, and they had the portfolio of clients, and they wanted to, you know, present voice as an option in a marketing campaign or in a brand awareness campaign, and they reach out to us for us to do this project. But it was always focused on, you know, a time frame, whatever happens when you are a marketing agency doing a voice project. So we got this a lot last year, and we've been getting more and more inquiries, business inquiries from companies wanting us to adapt business processes on voice technology, which was, you know, what we dreamt of from the beginning, to work with, you know, company processes. I worked 12 years with Accenture, and I imagine how can a company benefit using voice on their, you know, daily processes, and when this touches the final user. So I'm seeing this happening, and I think this is a great trend to watch, at least for how the market it is right now in Brazil. I think this will be a shift toward, you know, more company-centered experience and less like you know, marketing business case experiences. Another thing that I'm seeing is that a lot of for programmers are starting migrating from, you know, mobile app development to voice development. As it stands right now, there are not a lot of developers. You can see that by looking at the, you know, contests that Amazon and hosts here for, you know, skilled developers. There's not a lot of entries. One of these contests, just on a side note, was one focused on skills for, you know, for accessibility in last years. It was very interesting contest, very huge contest that Amazon held here in Brazil. But you'll see that in the end of the day, not a lot of developers engage with that. Why? Because they are focused on where is the money right now, which is, of course, in mobile development. And I think that in the near future, more and more programmers we will look at it and see an opportunity as, Amazon rolls out ISP here in Brazil, which is not available right now. But as soon as, Amazon put this and companies start to see the opportunity of ROI with a voice app, I think this will drive more developers, and this will, make the market more hot for everyone to be involved. And I think this is what I envision for the near future. Another great thing to mention is that with people going more out of home to work, to work on their offices, I think that there will be a shift in how people interact with smart speakers. I think that you will have a drop in that, because people will interact more with mobile phones.
Yeah.
This will be good, I think, for Google. I know that Alexa have a voice app in the Android and iOS, but I think that people will focus on more mobile experiences more than the living room experiences, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think, that kind of trend seems to just go along with what Sarah was saying earlier too, as we transition from the pandemic world to post-pandemic world. So I will pass the same question to Jen, and would you tell us about, specifically in England, with the companies that you are working with, where do you see the market and trends moving towards as we transition out of this pandemic era right now?
Yeah, so based on what I'm thinking today and the conversations you've had, it changes. I've got 6. I'm going to go through them really quickly and just shout if you want to know anything more about them. So I think, first of all, is a little bit what actually all the panelists actually have been talking about today is, I think there's going to be less of a friction of people who do voice and people who don't do voice, right? Mm-hmm. Just using an example, Tim, I think you mentioned about Siri. The amount of times I've got, say, friends or friends of friends, they ask what I do and I try and explain it and they go, oh, that's weird, and then what's voice? And then we turn and then they go and ask Siri something. And I'm like, that's that. And they're like, what do you mean? That's not voice. And I'm like, yeah, yes, that literally it's it. It's like you just your way of talking to the internet or talking to a computer. So I think there are a lot of people, honestly, I think if you went out and did surveying, I think a lot of people would say, I don't use voice, but they use Siri. So, and I think that's only going to increase with, that's already seen a lot in the US with cars. Pretty much all new cars now come with assistants of some description, right? Whether or not that's Handify, baking in their own thing into Mercedes, or whether that's Alexa or even Assistant available in cars, right? So people are going to start using assistants without thinking about it. I think also we'll see it coming out at the end of this year and into next year is workplaces, as Joao mentioned, like workplaces actually having voice interactions to them, bearing in mind how long it's going to take office spaces to actually get that hardware in place, but they're going to want to make, like, no one's going to want to touch lift buttons anymore. Mm-hmm. So elevators, sorry. So how are they gonna, all those innovations that are going to come through? So the first thing I think that's going to happen is people are going to be using voice without realizing they're using voice, even more than they do already. Number 2, I think, again, something that Tim mentioned, sorry, Tim, I'm stealing all your points and building off them, is I think increasingly with what's happened with call centers and customer services, companies are going to start to understand that the business case for voice does not have to be profit. It can be cost saving, right? Something I talk about a lot with businesses, especially we work a lot in the finance sector as well, is it's quite hard for me to carve out necessarily new customer acquisition, maybe at a push, but in terms of actually getting to the ends of a funnel to say open a bank account through voice, I could hand off to maybe mobile or web, but right now that's pretty tricky to get all the way through with the controls that you have to have in financial services. But I can reduce your call center by maybe 4% and I will save you millions. So that is the business case. You don't need to conflate it with something else or a different set of KPIs. And I think that's going to be increasingly of interest for business. When that becomes increasingly of interest for business, big business on voice is going to boom. 3, I think consumers are more demanding in their digital lives. They are asking why. It's like, why am I having to fill out this huge form with loads of data and it's really boring and arduous? I want to spend my life doing my life, not filling out your form. Why is this experience invasive or intrusive? Why is this brand so boring and clunky and old? And I think they question the experience of interacting with brands and organizations more. So I really think we're going to hit a new level of innovate or die, because the global financial situation is, as a general statement, there is less money to go around. Like, consumers are spending less money and they're going to spend it with innovators. Innovate or die. So I think that there's more competition than ever, and also people are more picky over what they're going to give their attention, and too right. And I think voice is a space that is of real interest for brands when they're looking at also helping us have a healthier relationship with our digital selves. That's almost a point in its own right, but very much linked to how brands can represent themselves in our lives. I don't know what point I'm on, 4 maybe. I still don't think we're rounded out on the privacy question yet. I still don't quite know where it's going. What's really interesting is when we do our own research, and we do quite a lot, something's dropping in 2 weeks. I'm just going to say, leave it at that. It's very exciting. Teaser's happening this week. No, it's dropping next week. Anyway,
looking forward.
And that's going to be research in the UK, US, and Germany. Is that, but what we can see is that people are really concerned about privacy. It doesn't actually stop them using devices. So that's a really interesting push-pull to see where we're going with that. And I don't know, but I think we'll know a lot more over the next 12 to 18 months on actually how that's going to round out. And a lot of that, I think, might precipitate a movement off the 2 main platforms into proprietary assistants, because people will feel more comfortable with that. Yeah. Saying that, and if you saw in the news recently, talking of McDonald's, the pushback that happened where someone has actually raised a lawsuit on the drive-through, talking of the drive-through, that's just because they were like, you're collecting voice data about me. I mean, I think it's a bit of a push, that one, but still that's interesting as well, because when it's just big Amazon, no one's going to go up against it. When it's an individual brand, where is the line? So I think privacy is going to reach a whole new area. My last point is, I think that voice is now going to become much more baked into the digital ecosystem. I think looking at what has happened, which may or may not have been precipitated by the pandemic, but looking at a lot of the new functionality that's starting to come out from Amazon and stuff like that, the correlation and the closeness between phone and smart speaker for, and also moving voice out the silo, so that there's less of a fear of, if you use voice to push to a mobile app or use voice to push to a website or web content, you're not failing at voice. Yep. You're just allowing people to navigate through a wider digital ecosystem, which is what we want to do. You're never going to not allow people to move from a mobile version of your website to a web browser version of your website. So I'm not quite sure why platforms have been so ring-fenced when it comes to allowing people to have that. So I think that's going to start to open up, and I think when that starts to open up, it's going to be more about a diversity and a sort of a patchwork of ways in which we can interact, and voice will become part of it rather than a separate channel. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, definitely. Those were all great points. I really like how you put voice becoming part of the ecosystem. And from my own personal observations too, like, I'm really looking forward to seeing more of those multi-modal communication ways of coming into play, not just in mobile phones, but on browser experiences or outside of just home smart speaker experiences. And I think Joao was mentioning that accessibility has become a huge thing. Is, a disabled community is also having trouble accessing the information that they need during this pandemic. They just really highlighted the open gaps in the industry, and it's really interesting to see some enterprises catching up on that and starting to introduce both chat and voice-based assistance, customer service, and even entertainment. So that's a really interesting thing that is coming out. Well, this conversation has been so interesting, and I feel like we could almost have an entire conference day just on this topic. But we all are in different time zones right now, and for the time being, this has been an amazing conversation. But before we wrap this up for good, I would like to open up the conversation to our audience. And I think there were some questions on the chat as well. If anyone would like to unmute and ask a question to our speakers, right now is your chance to do that. I was not able to follow the chat questions right here, but I believe there were some interesting questions that or points that our audience was raising at the moment. No questions from the audience?
No question, but this has been a great panelist. This has been one of the best talks I've been to, and I've been to a lot of voice talks. And so it's so interesting to see how businesses in different parts of the world are interacting with the audience, with the ecosystem. So just thank you so much for coming and giving us that.
I agree. I agree. Very dynamic.
Definitely. All right. Well, if there is no other question, I would like to just do one more thing. And let's see, where did this go? Maybe I closed that. But we have our ways to connect with us on the chat, I believe. If you would like to reach out to any of our speakers, please put down your own LinkedIn or any other way of communicating on the chat. And if you would like to get in touch with Women in Voice organization, whether the Silicon Valley chapter or other chapters, even the UK chapter, you can also do that. This has been a fantastic conversation. And thank you so much for joining all of us here from different time zones. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. It's good to see everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.